Here at Hort Innovation, and we're really pleased to do this. I'll just let you know that we are recording this session, and Jade has started that recording so that we can make this available to those of our colleagues that were not able to be here today. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the country of the traditional owners on the lands on which you join us from today. I'm actually based in Canberra, and today I'm on Noongarwal country, so Yuma from Noongarwal country, and I pay my respects and acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which you join us from today. I'm going to introduce you very quickly to Patrick Fry from Kantar. Patrick is the partner of growth strategy at Kantar, the leading Australian strategy house with brand and consumer expertise here in Australia and internationally. And Pat's going to take us through the methodology and the results of this study, and he's going to help us understand how to read the 2,000 plus pages of the report in ways that make sense for you and your business. Plenty of time for asking questions throughout this, and of course it will be recorded if you need to watch it back. So that we can get through quite a large volume of information, I'm going to ask everyone if they can, when Pat starts presenting, if we could put ourselves on mute and take our cameras off so we can focus on the presentation. But when we've got questions, use the hand up function, perhaps use chat, or turn your camera on and just wave at me. I'll be able to control that. We'll stop a few spots for Q&A, and we've got plenty of time at the end. Thanks again for being here. We're really excited. And Pat, I'm going to hand over to you.
Okay, thanks, Mila. I'll share my screen. Let me know when you can see that.
I can see your screen, Pat. Thank you. And yes, it's in Prezo mode. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so today I'll cover three things in detail. First of all, a bit of background and objectives of the overall study. The second thing I'll go into is the market prioritization matrix was a really key part of this in terms of identifying the where to play, and then there's more on how to win in the detail. And then, as you can see in section 3, we'll cover the cherry section, the results and recommendations, and you can view everything else at your leisure, and also a bit about the appendix, just how to read it. So yeah, that's really what we're going to cover today. So first of all, background and objectives. So first of all, the disruption from COVID-19 on Australia's ability to export really was the genesis of Hort Innovation proactively initiating and investing in several projects. One of these was the prequel to this, which was done by Deloitte, which identified 13 markets that offered growth potential. So what we did is build on that study. So we took the 13 markets and we designed a program that provides an in-depth understanding of consumption in these critical markets. And this is really to identify export growth opportunities for the commodities of interest. And today it's all about cherries. So just a little bit about the Deloitte report. Initially, it identified 12 markets. But what was India was actually put in as a 13th market because although it didn't make the cut, it was deemed to be a market of interest, which was quite prescient because it has indeed turned out to be that across many commodities, and cherries I think is one of interest. So you can get access to the Deloitte report, but this report is designed to stand alone. In that we use the 13 markets and we expand on them. We've also used some of the data in the Deloitte reports, and we've baked that into our calculations so that there is no need to necessarily go back. So hopefully this can deliver everything that you need from this point on. First of all, just a bit about the central question, and we always come back to this as a bit of our North Star. And in this case, it was, how can Australian horticultural industries unlock growth by generating consumer demand for different categories across different international markets for today and tomorrow, and the key thing being tomorrow. So this was very much about what will the future opportunities look like, and you'll see how that comes through in what we've done. So a bit more detail about the objectives. So it was really to provide a consumer-led perspective. So it was clear that the consumption or the consumer knowledge was really where there was a real hole in the knowledge. So we endeavoured to fill that. And it was to unpack consumers' attitudes and values, as well as their fresh produce shopping behaviour, how they consume fruits, vegetables and nuts in each of the 13 markets. So there's quite a lot of detail on all those aspects. It's designed to provide a strategic lens on which market represents the most attractive opportunities for each of the priority commodities, And it also identifies which commodities have the strongest right to play within each market. So today you can see the cherry, but all of that information is available for all the commodities and countries. It's all accessible. Just speak to the folks at Hort. So this is all about optimising export and product positioning today and into the future in order to drive growth against prioritised industries and facilitating development or deployment of effective resources. So it's about coordinated trade marketing resources and how to best get bang for buck for those. So very briefly, it was a 4-step process. We started with an audit and discovery, lots of stakeholder interviews, using all the information we had, including going through those Deloitte reports and other things. We then did a localise and enrich program, which was we interviewed experts in each market, and that gave us a real foundational view as to what are the dynamics and what are what's the framework of each market to help build our understanding, which led into the large quantitative study, which was in part 3 of the program. So this was 4,000 sample across most of the markets. Some of them, like Qatar, we only got 500 because it's just not possible to get more than that. And we asked about 2 consumption occasions, so 8,000 occasions across each market. So really large sample across a lot of markets, which enabled us to validate across markets, which is a real power of this study and a great database that you can draw upon for years to come. And then finally, we're in the align and embed phase, which is really a lot of these workshops and introducing how it all works. Just a reminder of the markets in the study: USA, UK, Singapore, India, Japan, Hong Kong, South Korea, Malaysia, UAE, Qatar, Taiwan, Vietnam, and Indonesia. And you'll note that China is not in that list, and that's because this study was about looking for opportunities outside China, so that was purposeful. And there are all the commodities, and you'll see cherries there. So that just covers the full gambit, and you're welcome to go and look at any of those other studies at your leisure. The 13 fruits in the study, and this is important because in terms of the competitive set that we've used, these will be the fruits that we compare against. What's next? Okay. The way these reports are designed, just briefly, is that there's a fruit report, there's a vegetable report, and a nut and dried fruit report. So rather than each commodity getting their own report, there were so many that we've chunked it up into 3. So you go into, for this case, the fruit category report, and you'll see lots of detail, much of which I'll share with you today. And then you go to the cherry section and any other section that you're interested in. There's also the vegetable and fruit and nut as you wish. The other thing to note is that the intention was to start with these reports as the gateway into market reports. So what these reports do is identify the key markets of interest. And then if there is a market based on these reports that you are interested in looking at for export opportunity, each market has their own report. And in those reports, there's a lot more detail about consumers and their attitudes and their values, etc. So it really helps understand what's different about a consumer in Vietnam or Taiwan compared to other markets. So we've used the comparisons across those 13 markets, which has been very valuable. But really now we'll delve into the market prioritisation matrix, which was a really important part of the analysis. And this was really to determine, from a consumer perspective, primarily, which markets represent the strongest growth opportunities for Australian exports, and this is based on commodity usage, Australian appeal, and the ability to command a premium. It's also worth noting that it's mostly the consumer lens, but it's not intended to... It also covers other factors as well. So things like supply chain, regulatory environment, so market access. And you'll see in the analysis, which I'll share with you now, some of the detailed statistics and information and data that went into that to give a more holistic view of whether a market is attractive and addressable. And these are the 2 dimensions really that we evaluate those on. So first of all, attractiveness. So this is how attractive is the consumer opportunity in a market for a commodity. And then we cross that with addressability. And this is how addressable is the consumer opportunity in a market for a commodity. So how easy or hard is it to go after? And the way we've calculated attractiveness, if we start there, is 3 main metrics that go into that. And they're weighted: penetration, which is effectively how often people consume, is 30% weight. People's likelihood to pay a premium is 40%, which gives you a real read on the willingness to pay more. And the third one is market access. And that's around dependency on imports, future economic prospects, and demand preferences. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail because it gives you a sense of the types of metrics that go into it. The first two came from the survey data, but these came from the Deloitte report. So market access attractiveness, there are three elements to that. The first one is import dependency, and that includes things like 3-year average value of imports, consumption share of production, and 10-year change in value of imports. So basically, the higher the values indicates and demonstrates greater reliance on imports and for sustained growth. The second one is future economic prospects, and we use things like GDP per capita between 20 and 2030, so it's, again, that future view. Level of change in urban population, 20 to 30, once again, a future view. And higher values there demonstrate larger, high-income markets, so more attractive. And finally, preference advantage, and this includes metrics like quality of demand. Do horticultural imports align with Australian exports? And is the country in the Northern Hemisphere? So there's a seasonality view there. And what higher rankings demonstrate greater potential for Australian horticulture to differentiate itself in a market. So the second dimension is addressability. And the three metrics that went into there were likelihood to purchase Australian. So it's getting to the nub of, is Australian origin appealing to a certain market? Obviously, the more appealing, the more addressable it is, or the easier it is to go after. That's 30% weight. The other one is ability to command a premium for a certain commodity. So this is that untapped premium opportunity, which is an important element of the study, and that was 40% weight. And then finally, 30% weight is market access. And this is things like value chain, competitiveness, ease of trade. And once again, I'll talk a bit about those. The first one is ease of trade and country risk. So this includes things like foreign competition, existence of free trade agreements or in negotiation, political stability and dispute status. So higher ranks indicate lower cost of doing business in a certain geography and reduced risk of market disruption from political factors. And the second element that goes in there is value chain competitiveness. So things like relative distance to market. So the further the market away, the less addressable it is. Things like port and transport infrastructure, the higher the better. And Australian horticulture import prices relative to country average. So once again, higher rankings demonstrate greater potential for Australian horticulture to differentiate itself in that market. So we bring this data together, and I'll explain a little bit about how to read it. So here are the two dimensions. So the vertical is attractiveness and the horizontal is addressable. And the way to read the four quadrants is that anything in the top right we consider a strategic priority. And this is strong overall consumer export opportunity given it's highly attractive and highly addressable. On the right-hand side of this chart, if we stay there for a minute, where certain markets are less attractive based on those metrics, but they are easier to address, we call them low-hanging fruit. So things that you can still go after, but you may not get the bang for buck. If we go to the left-hand side of the chart, where commodities or markets for a commodity are highly attractive but harder to address, we see these as a longer-term play because that means that it might just take longer to go after, it might cost you more, and you may not get the same return on investment as you would a strategic priority, but still the size of the opportunity is worth going after because it's highly attractive. And then finally, if markets appear in the low priority quadrant at the bottom left, based on low attractiveness and addressability, it's not something that we would suggest that you prioritise really. I think it's worth pointing out that all of these, this analysis is relative. So all of these markets have been identified as potential growth opportunities. So when you see these in the way they're laid out, it's not to say that you can't go after any of these 13 markets, but what the analysis would suggest is that certain markets would likely generate bigger bang for buck over a shorter period of time, may cost you less, and that's the way to read it. So please keep that in mind when I present the results. When we presented this initially, it was clear that there was some things that I think were worth, some considerations that were worth identifying just because the questions always came up. And the four considerations are these. no existing technical market access, markets with existing trade, premium opportunities, and focus of investment. And let me talk about what they're all about. So firstly, no existing technical market access. So existing technical market access for a commodity was intentionally not included in the evaluation of addressability. And this is because the project was designed to identify attractive and addressable future growth geographies. And therefore, the analysis was not restricted to current arrangements because we didn't want to get stuck into today. So the research is intended to support and inform industry decisions regarding the progress of any potential future or ongoing market access or market improvement requests. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, while the addressability calculation includes data on general market access and trade, it intentionally does not include whether Australia currently trades in a particular commodity. And the reason for this is that the goal of the analysis is to provide an objective assessment of whether a market is attractive and addressable independent of current arrangements. So just because you're there, it doesn't necessarily mean it fits the criteria of our attractiveness and addressability. So therefore, if a market that we are currently trading for a particular commodity is shown not to be a strategic priority, this does not mean that we should consider withdrawing from the market. It does, however, mean that we recommend re-evaluating the relative focus of future investment in this market and consider whether other markets are more attractive or should be a strategic priority when looking for future growth opportunities. So please keep that in mind. The third thing is premium opportunity. And in evaluating attractiveness and addressability, we have intentionally used data that shows where premium opportunities can be found. And this is because we wanted to find that profitable growth opportunity rather than where the volume is, or only where the volume is. So Australian commodities will have more chance of growing profitably, the keyword profitably, where we have a better chance to command that price premium. So high commodity penetration in a market has also been used to evaluate attractiveness, i.e. where penetration is high, it's attractive. But the analysis, as you've seen in the way that we've weighted the calculations of attractiveness and addressability, favour markets where there's a larger opportunity for Australian products to command a premium. So keep that in mind. And then finally, the evaluation and prioritisation of export markets into the quadrants is intended to be only one input into decision making of where to focus investment. So the reason for that is that the objective of the project was primarily to offer a consumer lens into commodity consumption. So it was really all about the consumer. And this was to enable export decisions to be informed by more robust consumer data. So we still include additional market factors from previous Deloitte, but we really lean on the consumer element of this. But export decisions should be made using all available information, including the economics of local growers and exporters, and this report forms one input into that. We're hopeful that this will form a large part of that decision making, but if you have unique factors to your business or your area, please use that information. We encourage you to use all available. We certainly use all available information that we've had at our disposal. So please keep that in mind. So without further ado, I'll share you with the results of the cherry. So the way to read this then is that, as we've seen the strategic priority, the top right, the markets that cherries come or show to be the most desirable or strategic priorities are Hong Kong, Vietnam and UAE. And I'll show you a bit more of the details to why that's the case. You can see that India and Indonesia are also very attractive, slightly less addressable, but still of interest. They're right near that cusp. Low-hanging fruit, there's another three markets. So Taiwan, Singapore and Malaysia fit into that bucket. Qatar is also in that top left-hand quadrant. USA, very attractive, third most attractive actually. But we find across this and many other commodities that addressability is also very low, and that's largely driven by distance, the tariffs, also local competitiveness. Local market production seems to be high for a lot of commodities, and also competition from surrounding geographies, more in South America, Canada as well, places like that. And you'll see low priority, Japan, UK, Korea. I will note that Japan, when we presented these, has been rather a talking point. And I'll share with you some of the detail as to why that's been considered a low priority, and certainly it ends up here. But I'm curious, and maybe I'll pause here for a minute to hear what the initial feedback might be to these results, particularly around the strategic priorities, and any views on anything that might have surprised you or not surprised you, I suppose. So yeah, any comments or thoughts or questions on this indeed?
Thanks, Pat. And so if anyone's got any questions, you're welcome to either use the raised hand function, turn your camera on and wave at me, or put something in the chat. And while you're catching your breath, Pat, I'm confident that people will come back to this and have further questions down the track. But I can let our audience know that we're going to go into the deep dive of why some of those bubbles are the size they are and where they sit on this 2x2. So if there's no questions at the moment, I'm not seeing any raised hands or any questions. I think we might keep going, Pat.
Okay, I will point out, and I didn't say this, that the size of the bubble is equal to penetration. So that's just...
Pat, I'll just interrupt you. We do have a question from Tim.
Oh,
Thank
great.
you, Tim,
Go
for
on.
waving and turning your camera on. Over to you.
Hi, Tim.
No worries, guys. Good day. Sorry I was a bit late joining. Just looking at this slide here, there's one glaring country that I can't sort of see on here, and that is our good friends in China.
Oh, yes, Tim, you missed that at the beginning. We intentionally excluded China from the study because the study was all about looking for opportunities outside China.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, we don't want to give anyone the impression that China is not a critically important market for any of our Australian horticultural commodities, but the purpose of this study was to look for the markets thereafter.
As well.
Sorry, was that another question?
I think we might just have a bit of feedback going on there, or perhaps someone had their microphone on. Are there any other questions before? Just check the chat. Sorry, this question in the chat. What impact did the Australian India ECTA have on selecting India, Patrick? Or did you want to go into a bit of background of why India was added to the list? Thanks, Jackie.
My understanding from India being put on the list is that I think it came in 17th, actually, on the original work that was done by Deloitte. But there was a lot of discussion, I understand, from Horton. Jade, you might have a view on this, that it just seemed to be, it would be a big omission to exclude something that I think there was a general sense that India does present a big future opportunity. And what we certainly have found in this study is that it has indeed turned out to be a strategic priority for many commodities. And in here, it only just misses out by a whisker being a strategic priority based on the addressability, noting that these are relative measures. So I think India for cherries, I mean, it's second most attractive here. So to that end, I think for cherries, it was a good, it was one that was helpful to include in the study. But Jade, I don't know if there was any more detail around why India was put in, but it was certainly a good decision, whoever made it.
No, I think you've covered it off there, Pat. As to the overall, with all the commodities involved, that was the decision taken for India.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Jade. Thanks, Pat. We've got another question from Tim.
Sorry, guys. I've noticed that, and you may have already spoken about this, or you may be going to address it, guys, but I've noticed in your low-hanging fruit here, you've got Taiwan, which I think for us is a very, very good strategic area that we can look at accessing. But from a mainland perspective, we used to have Taiwan as a market, which we no longer really have because we haven't got a good enough protocol to work within. But that is in the low-hanging fruit, but it all comes down to market access. And have you mentioned Thailand at all in this area? Because Thailand is a tremendous opportunity for cherries generally from a mainland perspective. We've got great access there out of Tassie. But again, that was a market that we had on the mainland, which we've lost. But we seem to take forever trying to regain that accessibility.
Okay, I'll cover both those questions. So firstly, Taiwan. You may have missed this, but we purposely didn't include market access as a measure, because what we didn't want to do, Tim, is exclude something just because you either did or didn't have it. So what we will look, the reason for that is that we wanted this to be a future-looking study, and we wanted it to support any future decisions around what market access you would go after. So given that this is a market that would be of interest to cherries, this data supports any push to improve market access in Taiwan. So that's the way you should read that. In terms of Thailand, once again, that was done by the previous work. So we inherited the 13 markets, Tim. So yeah, unfortunately, Thailand wasn't one of the markets that was given to us to deep dive into. But that might be something that you would think about in future. I know it's been talked about for other commodities as well, of Thailand being of interest, but it unfortunately didn't make the cut here.
And Pat, I'm going to just ask one more question that's come up in the chat, which is Philippines appears as a priority market in the export strategy. Any thoughts? And perhaps you're going to, because Philippines isn't included in our study. Is it the same answer for Thailand in that situation? Is that it didn't come up?
It is exactly the same answer. So we were given the scope, and that was really clear. And I know with other industry bodies, we've actually already talked about replicating the study. So, you've got 13 markets here. There is a case if it's really important and the investment is there, to potentially, invest in another market and once again do a study, same questions. That would mean that you could actually compare, and you could put those bubbles on this chart eventually if that's important to you. So that's something that it might be worth the body thinking about, whether there are other markets that you want to throw into the mix in the future.
Thanks, Pat. And I'm going to let you keep diving through the data, because I know that what you're going to do is explain to us that the bubbles on this sheet are relative to each other, so we can understand cherries in relative to, markets relative to each other. And so where's the most attractive and the most addressable, but it also, so it tells us where the future geographies are to look at, but we're also going to learn and look at cherries compared with other commodities like other fruits. So I'll let you crack on.
Okay. So the next slide is really just, well, the Hort Innovation, and we had a PRG group who really helped us shape this report. And one of the decisions was to focus initially on the key priority markets. So identify 3 of interest markets, or 4, however many landed in that top quadrant. So the way this is presented, there's sort of those priorities that are presented in this summary report, but you can find all the detail on all markets as we go through. So please keep that in mind. So the other reason why we presented it like this is that we wanted to cater to as many different stakeholder groups as possible. So there are pages like this where it's written with as little data as possible, just for those people who just want to know the key high notes. But for all those of you who really love data, there's no end of it in the appendix and in the other detailed slides. So I'll share with you the different levels of the way that we presented this. So this slide is really just to say, if you want a summary of the strategic priorities, here they are. And it tells you they're attractive and addressable, and this is why they ended up as strategic priorities. The following slides then give you some, I think it really gives you the core reasons why things ended up where they are. So you can see that for penetration, so this is one of the first things that go into attractiveness, you can see UAE is very high, Vietnam and Hong Kong, the other two there, they're really slightly above the market average. India, USA, Qatar, we saw those ones being in that top long-term play. So that attractiveness is very high, and that's why you get those ones at the top. The next metric of attractiveness is that willingness to pay a premium. And you can see that Hong Kong leads the leaderboard there, and Vietnam and UAE also very high and all above average. So once again, it gives you a bit of an indication as to what drives those being in that top quadrant. And then finally, that market access ranking. Rather flat, this curve, but you can see Vietnam is actually right down the bottom, but nonetheless, it was able to be pushed up given the penetration and the premiumness as well. So that sort of led to that being a bit higher on the attractiveness scale. When we
Pat, could we ask you to pause there, because Tim's got a
Sure.
question straight
Go,
away
Tim.
on your
Yep.
attractiveness.
Great. Go, Tim.
Yeah, you're very attractive, Pat. Thank you.
No worries.
Just going back up, I'm really quite interested from a personal perspective, but also from an industry perspective in relation to the numbers that you're showing here for India, because I'm quite stunned at the high numbers you've got there for the amount of people that are consuming cherries,
Mhm.
and the fact that there is a high percentage of people that are willing to pay more money for premium. I'm stunned that that information is where you're coming from cherries, because that's not the intel that I'm getting in regards to India, and I'm just be interested to hear what any of the other cherry guys that are online have got to say in relationship to that.
So for Tim, first of all, I'd say that, obviously India is a pretty big place, and we can only do this research in tier 1, 2 and 3 cities. So it's fair to say that you're already focusing on the top end of the market in India. So even gaining a small amount of market share in a small corner of the Indian market is a very, very attractive place. So the data, or the data capture, has been skewed to the wealthier people in India effectively. So that's why it might feel a little bit high, but it's certainly, even capturing a small part of that high-end market in India is still a big opportunity compared to lots of the other markets. So so that's kind of one thing. But once again, I'd also be curious to hear from other people whether that's true. We also know from India that people are all like that upper end of the market, status being a thing. They're willing to pay more for products from other parts because the trust in local food is low. So there's an insight there around the Indian population, particularly the well-to-do, definitely willing to pay more for all sorts of products that don't come from India. So yeah, that's true when it comes to food.
Thanks, Pat.
Anything else on that?
No, I think we'll keep going, and we'll have another break for some more questions as we go. There's a couple of comments going on in the chat, but my suggestion is you keep going. Thank you.
Okay. And just again, Tim, on that point I made, you can see that when it comes to how likely you would be to buy cherries imported from Australia, India, 18%, it's in that top tier of countries where Australia does have a halo. Hong Kong being very strong, Taiwan, India, Vietnam, the top 4. And you can see Japan, what we see across lots of commodities is that Australia doesn't have.
Oh, sorry, Pat, you're just on mute. I don't know if we did that or we just missed the last bit. You said Australia doesn't have.
Oh, Australia doesn't have the halo in Japan. So
Thank you.
That's the thing. You can see it that Hong Kong, Taiwan, India, Vietnam, the top 4 well above market average. But Japan, UK, these are developed markets, and they're just used to getting things from all over the world. So they don't see Australia as being, particularly worth paying more for. Whereas those other countries, particularly close markets, they see Australia as clean and green. And when it compares to their local produce, they'll certainly go for Australian produce. So that's why addressability is high for those strategic priority markets. And we look at the willingness to pay more for premium quality cherries, and you can see Hong Kong #1 again. For cherries, UK is pretty high. Singapore, UAE, Vietnam also appear very high there. And then market access addressability. Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaysia, right up there. Vietnam and UAE are a bit lower down, but not far off the market average. So that didn't really pull their addressability score down much. USA, UK, you can see that those two really, that was distance that brought them down. Not sure about market access in India, but there's metrics to go behind this if you're keen to understand them. So the next section then is around the profiling of the commodities. And once again, the way we've done this is there's some certain slides where there's less data, and it really gives you that high level overview as to the difference in how consumers perceive cherries across the market. So if you look at this summary slide with the W's, You can see that in the first one, there are some numbers here. That's penetration. You can see they're all pretty high. Dinner snacking in Hong Kong is when people like to consume cherries. In Vietnam, it's lunch and dessert, and in UAE, it's snacking and lunching. Fresh on its own, across the board, not surprising. When we get into the why, so I'll take you through more detailed data on that, but taste is a massive thing for cherries. In Hong Kong, it's seen as quick and easy, but as an indulgence in Vietnam. So these are the top two reasons why people choose cherries in these different markets. At home is the place where people mostly consume it, and with family. It's a very sharing thing. You get a bowl of cherries out and people share it. So at home sharing with family, very common across markets. And then when we delve into the strategic imperatives, there's a little bit of duplication here from the previous page. So the needs to satisfy, you can see in that second one. But the functional attributes come in here. So sweetness is a big thing. Refreshing taste is another thing that comes up for Vietnam and UAE. And in Hong Kong, fresh and light, functional things that people are looking for. We also then delve into the premium opportunity. So we ask people, what would you pay a premium for? Fresher was number one. So if you want to charge premium for premium quality cherry, you need to make it fresh. Flavour, more flavour came across, and organic, free from pesticides in Vietnam and UAE, very important. People pay more for that. And in Hong Kong and Vietnam, sweetness, they'll pay more for. Overcoming the barriers, too expensive is a big one. That comes up a lot, by the way, so we'll see the relativities in a minute when you see the data. And in Vietnam, bruising easily is something that people are calling out as a reason why they wouldn't buy a cherry. And then if people are not buying cherries, the key substitutes are strawberries, table grapes, apples, and also bananas there in UAE is another one. So that's the summary view, but each of one of these has then the detailed view. So you can see here Hong Kong, Vietnam, UAE, and we've averaged for the top priorities there. Prior to this study, we also did work in Australia where we did a whole demand space model in Australia. So some of the questions are similar. So what we've done here is we've pulled in some of that old data and put it in these charts where possible. And so in this case, this question was asked in the Australian study, where 48% of Australians say they eat cherries for a snack. And you can see how that differs, that's more than any other geography actually. And the call out, the way to look at these is that what's interesting are the differences here. So Hong Kong stands out here. 43% of Hong Kong consumers say they eat cherries for dinner. So that's when you're looking at Hong Kong as a market to go after, you can see how that might change the way you go to market, or certainly how you might communicate with consumers in terms of their appetite to eat it at a different time of day. The others are pretty similar, but lunch comes in a bit more for some of these other markets, particularly Vietnam and UAE. And then when we look at what kind of snack, snack between lunch and dinner is the big one, same for Australia. But late night snack, it comes up a lot more in some of these other markets, particularly Hong Kong. So people are eating them for a late night snack. That's interesting. No one's really doing that in Australia, or certainly a very small percentage compared to these other export markets. How do people consume? 48% of Australia say fresh on their own, but in Hong Kong, it's much higher than that. The other interesting one is part of a snack in Hong Kong is higher, and there's lots of other things too, which comes up much more highly in these markets. So that's things like in smoothies and frappes, ingredients in baking, for cooking, as part of a cocktail. So the full details available in the appendix, but this just gives you a view as that other consumption of cherries in some of these other markets is much higher than Australia. So Australia being as a helpful benchmark to, particularly if you don't have much knowledge about the consumers in these markets. It's also worth noting, as I mentioned before, that each of these markets have their own reports, so there's lots more detail in the market report when you want to go and pick those up. In terms of where were you, most people are at home. We found that. More out of home in UAE and Vietnam, but broadly the majority are eating it at home. Where did you get them from? Purchased myself. Someone else got it for me. So in Hong Kong, more support in households might be suggesting why that data is a little bit different. Who were you with? What we find across the board is for many of these Asian markets, it's that multi-generational family dynamic lends itself to much more sharing. So you can see that in Australia, 47% say I was just myself, but in other markets, the majority is with somebody else. So spouses, family, children, colleagues, groups of friends. So just a lot more sharing opportunities in these other markets, particularly in Asia. So there's a range of reasons why people choose, and we did this study, as I mentioned, in Australia, quite a big study, and we did lots of analytics on this to work out what are the driving reasons behind why people choose fruits, vegetables and nuts. And there was universally 6 things that came that are the driving force. Now, across the different markets, the weight of these changes, but they still were common across all markets. So it was a very useful framework, and we've rolled that out across in this study. So the 6 are taste, quick and easy is a big one. Healthy and nutritious, another big reason. Indulgence, many of these things are seen as indulgences. Physical and mental energy, and connection and bonding and celebrating with people. So they're the 6 underlying needs, reasons why people pick up fruits, vegetables and nuts. And for cherries, it's taste, and that's a very high. So 59% of people say that it's taste that's the main reason why they pick up a cherry. It's also seen as an indulgence, 41%. So, and also that's very high compared to many other commodities, and that's not surprising, cherry being that really indulgent, tasty indulgence is the way that could be described. It's also quick and easy. So also all those very high numbers compared to other commodities. And then you can look at the detail here across the board. And the way I read these downwards is I look for the outliers and what's different. So the one that comes up here that looks most different is indulgence in Vietnam. 49%, that's higher than anywhere else and significantly higher than Australia. So the way to look at that then is that really in Vietnam, selling those cherries and particularly trying to get a premium, seeing it as or talking about it as an indulgence will appeal far more to Vietnamese consumers than anywhere else. They also like it to connect. So it's that connecting an indulgent moment for Vietnamese consumers. And you'll see lots of these charts. And so I always zoom in on the differences that help us understand the different ways to go into these markets if you so choose. Then we split that out even more. So this is actually breaking out the details. So these detailed attributes were what went into those 6 factors that you saw on the previous page. So when you really want to understand it in more depth, everyone would eat is something that pops for Vietnam. Refreshing in UAE is higher than anywhere else, 31%, so number 1. And it's only number 1 in UAE. Really tasty is what's number 1 in every other market, including Australia, and in Australia by quite a long way. Satisfy craving is also big in UAE. To help me relax and unwind, something that's big in Vietnam. So you can see that just looking, particularly when you're looking at particular markets, it starts to give you a sense of how you might go marketing or selling cherries in particular markets compared to others. When we look at the functional attributes for cherries, as I mentioned earlier, sweetness was the big one, and 27% of consumers would say that sweetness is there, and these are for the priority markets. 23% say refreshing taste, and 22% would say fresh and light. And then here's the detail in those markets, and you can see that it's that refreshing taste, which is number 1 in Vietnam, number 1 also in UAE, so really important in those markets. What's more important in Hong Kong is fresh and light. Also being quick and easy to prepare is very important to Hong Kong consumers. Vietnamese consumers would also say it's helpful to aid digestion, 19%, which is number 3 actually. So very much more significant than any other market. So that's an interesting dynamic about Vietnam. Now, when it comes to the premium opportunity, the top 4 things and the reasons why people would pay more for a premium cherry. Fresh, 38%. It's pretty high. That's more than a third. 29% say sweeter. 28% say more flavour, and 23% say organic or free from pesticides. So these are the strategic priority markets. And here's how they break down in more detail. So organic is most important in UAE and Vietnam, not important in Hong Kong, actually. So that's an interesting dynamic. So you don't really have to push the organic thing in Hong Kong, but doing that in Vietnam and UAE, you'll get a much better, people will listen to you far more when you talk about that. The more flavour is more important to people in Hong Kong. So you can see those top three in Hong Kong are quite pronounced. Fresher, sweeter, more flavour, and everything else is much less important. Whereas in Vietnam, it's a little bit more spread across as to what's important to them. More appetising, higher in vitamins and minerals comes up as well in Vietnam. So hopefully all these are interesting detail if you want to get into them for each of the markets when you go after them. When it comes to barriers, price and affordability was obviously a big one. So 38% are saying that price is a barrier. So that's pretty high. So they're seen as expensive. The next most cited barrier, which is half of price, is bruising easily, so 19%, and then quality. So bruising and quality go together, but it's really price which is the main thing. And when people see those barriers, that it's too expensive and the quality's not there and it's bruising, they'll pick up things like grapes, apples, and strawberries is the other one there that comes up. And then when we look at the detail, you can see that too expensive, yeah, pretty common across. And in Australia, it's number one by some margin. Australia doesn't see really other major barriers at all. It's really just the expense of it. In Hong Kong, that's almost 50% of people say it's too expensive. So I wonder if that's anecdotally true from your perspectives, from what you know about Hong Kong. Vietnam seems to be where bruising is an issue. So once again, would be an interesting dynamic to look at how the market and how it ends up in market in Vietnam to see whether there's something going on there, because that's certainly different. It's almost twice, or it's more than twice Australia and almost twice the other markets. So that seems to be something that could be solvable potentially. So once again, it starts to give you a window into what are the things that you need to reduce effectively or reduce the perceptions. Expensive is an interesting one because people always tend to tick something that's too expensive. They wanted something cheaper, but if you can convince them that it's worth the price, then that perception that it's too expensive can go down even if the price stays the same. So that's something to think about when it comes to value. Then for each of these commodities, there's this page, which is a data-free page, which really just articulates very, very clearly the where to play and the how to win. So if you wanted to pick up one page to tell you what this data is telling us, this is it. So the first one is to focus on strategic priority markets. And this is about focusing on markets where consumers are willing to pay a premium for quality cherries, and in this case, Hong Kong, UAE, Vietnam. And that is to leverage already high appeal for Australian cherries in Hong Kong and Vietnam and improve appeal in the UAE. And this can drive incremental growth in Australian cherry exports. So that's the where to play. When it comes to how to win, there are three elements. The first one is we have to deliver the core consumer needs. And for cherries, it's refreshing taste, indulgent, and that are good for sharing. So really they're the underlying core needs that we have to deliver. And this is to ensure cherries are at or above par for being sweet, fresh and light, and that serve as a quick and easy snack or dessert. So a bit around the functional and the day part there as to how you deliver those core needs. But to charge a premium, the things that we need to leverage is a premium advantage where cherries can deliver fresher, sweeter, more flavour and free from pesticides. And we saw the data there and how that differs across markets. And then finally, we really need to reduce those barriers. So if we can address perceptions that cherries are too expensive, that they bruise easily, and maybe that's more of a Vietnamese problem, and improve quality issues, then it can minimise consumer drift to close substitutes like table grapes, apples and strawberries. So yeah, if we can reduce those barriers, we can also improve our chances of getting that premium opportunity and growth for cherries across those priority markets. So I might pause there a moment just for any questions or thoughts, and I'm happy to go back I know I whizzed through some of that data. Obviously, you'll have the data, so I'm really trying to give you a sense of how to read it. But I'm happy to take questions and go back and answer any detailed questions that you might have.
Thanks, Pat. And so we'll invite questions again, hand up or turn your camera on. And Pat, I'll go straight to one that's come up in the chat. Thank you, Kate.
Yep.
Given the emphasis on willing to pay a premium in the analysis, was there any consideration about relative pricing between the markets? For example, some countries already pay a high price or a premium price for fruit, but may not be willing to pay more.
Yes, we did do that. And in some cases, we have tried to weight it in a way that's a bit more fair. And there are other ways to look at the data too, where you could choose to change the weight on that if necessary. But I think that's really up to the commodity and up to the geography. So what was really important is that there was consistency, because what we wanted to do was be as objective as possible. And I mentioned earlier on as well that bringing in other data sources is useful. So if there is a view that for a certain commodity in a certain market, you're already getting a premium for what you're paying, that is worthwhile information to bring in. The other thing we did was, by asking the question, we asked it in a way that is relative to the internal market price that people are paying anyway. So we did our best to try and mitigate any skews in that regard. But what I would suggest is that if there's any additional data that you have on a geography to bring to bear, I would encourage you to do that. But what this does is it compares quite neatly across markets, but we do try and account for that as best we can. So it is quite a nuanced answer, that one, but there really isn't any other way to do it, because we just don't know the price of cherries in every single market in every single place. So we had to do our best in the parameters that we were set for the research.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks, Kate. And just a reminder that the data output is comparative, so between the markets. So the same question was asked for all of the other commodities in all of the other markets. I'm going to go to Jackie's question, which is also in the chat. And just for those that put questions in the chat, if you prefer to turn your camera on and ask your own questions, please feel free to do so. I'm happy to read them, but if you would prefer to ask them yourself, you're very welcome to. Jackie's question is on shelf life. Does shelf life enter the equation when consumers decide between cherries and other fruit? I can probably answer that we didn't specifically ask questions on shelf life, but you could go to the quality.
Here's a good one. There's not a specific on that, but there's a couple of good proxies here. Quality is often poor. That's a good proxy. So it's that idea that you go in and you look on the shelf and it is bruised, or it's not the greatest quality. So in Vietnam and UAE, that seems to be an issue. The other proxy here is it goes off too quickly or it doesn't last, and it's actually quite comparable too. So in Vietnam and UAE, they're two markets where that's quite high, all higher than Australia, 15 and 16%. I'm trying to look at anything else that might. The other one there is they are never in the right state of ripeness when sold in shops. But actually, that doesn't seem to be a big barrier anywhere. So that's quite good. So I would read that as I look at quality and I look at it goes off too quickly, does not last. They're the two ones that I look for as a good proxy for shelf life.
Thanks, Pat. And just a reminder that when Pat's showing a slide like this and we're just displaying Hong Kong, Vietnam and UAE, in the full reports, all of the markets are in there for all of the questions. So you can look at another market. If you have a particular interest in a different market, you can see that in the full reports. And Jade's put the link to access those full reports in the chat. If you have any questions about accessing that, please reach out to us. So just noting this is just one piece of information, one piece of input data into your decision making in terms of accessing any particular market. But what we've asked Pat to do here today is to guide us through the sorts of reports to answer the sorts of questions, but you may be interested in a particular market. You'll find that information in the full report.
Just looking at this while you were talking, Mila, I'd add a third element there too. It bruises easily would be also a good proxy. So you've got three things there too.
That's great. And also, Pat, Olivia's reminded me, thanks, Olivia, also from the Kantar team, that you can actually compare cherries to all of the other fruit commodities in the fruit category report. So you can see the similar slide here, take out cherries and perhaps look at a summer fruit or berries or another fruit that you're interested in comparison to. So, you know, what does something look like, or how does it perform in a particular market, and what do the consumers think of it?
So Amelia, while you were talking, I had another thought. So just back one slide, there's another question on what does premium quality mean to you? And if you look at the bottom there, it says lasts longer. So in Vietnam and UAE, it's far more important that it lasts longer or has shelf life. So another good proxy to answer that question.
Yeah, great question, Jackie. Look, you've made the researchers delve into the research to help you explain the answer, and that's what we love. So are there more questions at this point? Because Pat's got some more information for us. Really happy to take questions as we go. Happy for you to turn your cameras on or raise your hand or put them in the chat. Thanks, Pat. I don't have any other questions coming up at the moment, so we'll ask you to keep going.
Okay, well, I think there's not much left, actually, and it's more, you sort of touched on it, Mila, which is the appendix, and this is for the detail junkies out there like us. There's so much detail in here. We've really tried to. So to Mila's point, that report is quite. It only focuses on the strategic priorities because we decided as a project team and with the PRG and with Hort, it was just too much detail when we covered everything. But if you want it, it's in the appendix. So you'll get things like a bit of description, and then you'll get charts like this. We haven't shown many of them, but you can kind of see that, there's every bit of information that we've tried to really display everything as much as possible for you. So hopefully your need to come and ask questions is minimal, but we're happy to answer them if you have one. So hopefully that appendix will keep you satisfied for everything that you need to know. So yeah, you can see lots of numbers there for those of you who like numbers. So that's really it, actually. So yeah, once again, if you've got any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them on the fly. I quite like those challenges. Otherwise, we'll get back to you if I can't answer the question.
Thanks, Pat. Really appreciate that. So again, it's our chance to ask more questions. The access to the reports plural, because there's not just the fruit category report of which cherries is contained within. You may choose to access all of the market reports. So for each of the geographies that Pat started to outline, they all have their own unique report. They're in there. Please reach out if you need them. Another reminder that we were agnostic to technical market access. So this project did not identify or target markets where we already have technical market access. It was about future geographies. And you may have existing trade to some of the markets that were not included. Thank you for the suggestions of other markets. We chose the ones we did at the time the project began. So there may be objective analysis about other existing markets. And I think probably just two more points that Pat highlighted a lot, and it's always useful to highlight these again. Premium opportunities are intentionally highlighted where we can achieve that price premium. And we just want to remind everyone, it's just one piece of input data. And it may be that you've got other pieces of input data about particular markets that are of interest to you. So whilst I've been talking, Pat, we've got one more brilliant question from Jackie, who's asked, was packaging included and considered? So
yeah, and page 61 again, you'll see that what does premium quality mean to you? Premium packaging, second from the bottom. You can see that it's far more important in UAE than anywhere else. Also 15% in Vietnam would say it's important. So yeah, it just gives you a relative view that it's twice as more important to UAE as it is in Hong Kong. So yeah, focus on your premium packaging in UAE, not Hong Kong, or if you can do both, great, but you can kind of see that's an important one there.
Thanks, Pat. Answering on the fly. I love it. Last call for any further questions, or if people would like to turn their cameras on and ask, or maybe answer Tim's question from earlier, if anyone wanted to have a conversation about that. We might just say thank you very much to Patrick, to the Kantar team for their work and the presentation today, Pat. Thank you. Thank you to our attendees who've asked some great questions and kept us going. Again, we recorded this today. We've got access to the reports. Please have a deep dive into them, and we welcome some more questions on what you find interesting in this International Consumer Demand Project. Thanks, Pat. Thanks, everybody.
Pleasure.